Congress is returning to Washington for a work period that will be filled with important to-do items. But we already know what will top the agenda over in the House of Representatives. House Democrats are finally indulging in their three-year-old impeachment obsession. Full steam ahead. Many of us remember the Washington Post headline that was literally published on Inauguration Day back in 2017. Here's what it said: "The campaign to impeach President Trump has begun." And sure enough, House Democrats have been at it ever since. One prominent House Democrat called this presidency illegitimate before it had even begun. One of Speaker Pelosi's committee chairs, whom she has tasked with leading this process, promised years ago that she'd find a way to impeach the president. So, Madam President, now that Speaker Pelosi has finally crumbled and allowed her left-wing impeachment caucus to dictate the House's actions, I don't think many of us were expecting to witness a clinic in terms of fairness or due process. But even by their own partisan standards, House Democrats have already found new ways to lower the bar. This is about the most consequential process the House of Representatives could possibly engage in: overruling American voters and nullifying an election. Surely, any such process must be conducted with the utmost fairness and transparency. It must be held to the most exacting of standards. And yet, House Democrats have wasted no time throwing fairness and precedent to the wind. Already, they've denied their Republican counterparts certain minority rights, like equal subpoena power, that Republicans provided Democrats during the Clinton impeachment. Already, they've made clear that President Trump's counsel will not be allowed to participate in hearings, present evidence, and cross-examine witnesses, all important rights that Republicans provided to President Clinton. Already, one House chairman has been caught publicly mischaracterizing his committee's handling of the whistleblower inquiry on which this whole investigation hinges. So, Madam President, for all the public hyperventilating over institutional norms that we've heard from House Democrats in recent years, it appears they have no intention of letting norms, precedents, or basic due process stand in the way as they seek to cancel out a presidency. In the meantime, here in the Senate, we'll keep our focus squarely on the substantive work that we need to complete for the American people. In the coming days, we'll confirm another slate of President Trump's well-qualified nominees. For starters, later this afternoon, we'll advance the nomination of Barbara Barrett, the President's choice to be Secretary of the Air Force. And speaking of our armed forces, Congress can waste no more time in getting our appropriations process back on track and delivering the funding that our service members need. Just 2 months ago, the President and the Speaker of the House produced an agreement to guide the appropriations process. The White House and congressional leaders set top-line funding targets for defense and non-defense and agreed to forego poison pills. But last month, unfortunately, our Democrat colleagues went back on the deal. Routine funding negotiations were again subject to poison pill threats, and urgent resources for the operations of the Pentagon were withheld for the sake of politics. Look, we need to put these political games aside. Democrats need to stop filibustering a pay raise for our troops and the funding our commanders need. We need to get our funding process back on track for the entire federal government. And House Democrats need to stop slow-walking the USMCA, the landmark trade agreement that stands to create 176,000 new American jobs. Mexico is ready, Canada is ready, and a majority here in the Senate is ready. The entire continent is just waiting on Speaker Pelosi to stop blocking this win for the United States and stop blocking these new jobs. I don't care how much my Democratic colleagues in the House may dislike the president. they shouldn't throw 176,000 new American jobs on the scrap heap. On all these fronts, I hope sincerely that our Democratic colleagues will be able to separate this vital business from their animus toward the administration and join Republicans in moving forward with the work of the American people. Now, one final matter, I know I speak for many of our colleagues on both sides of the aisle in expressing my grave concern at the events that have unfolded in Syria in recent days. Turkey is our NATO ally. Yes, it hosts millions of Syrian refugees and has a legitimate security concern about the situation in Syria. But Turkey's escalation of hostilities with the Syrian Kurdish partners who've helped the United States fight terrorism is completely and totally unacceptable. This violence needs to end. Syrian Kurdish forces have stood proudly alongside U.S. forces in the fight against ISIS. Over years of joint effort, their shared sacrifices have put ISIS on its heels and rendered its physical caliphate essentially non-existent. But leaving the field now would mean leaving the door wide open for a resurgence of this dangerous force and a new iteration of the Islamic State, creating a power vacuum begging for the meddling influence of Russia, leaving northeastern Syria wide open for Iran to extend its reach unimpeded all the way from Tehran to the doorstep of our friends in Israel, and destroying the leverage we currently have to compel Bashar al-Assad to stop his slaughter of the Syrian people and negotiate an end to this terrible conflict and humanitarian catastrophe. So, Madam President, I want to make something clear. The United States has taken the fight to Syria and Afghanistan because that is where our enemies are. That's why we're there. Fighting terrorists, exercising leadership in troubled regions, and advancing U.S. interests around the world does not make us an evil empire or the world's policeman. It makes us a prudent and responsible world power that stands up for our own security and the freedom of others. Alongside the 80 coalition partners that U.S. forces have led in the counter-ISIS coalition, that is what we must continue to do. We must continue to provide support to the local forces that carry the lion's share of the responsibility to defend their homelands. And this effort must continue to include our allies and partners, even the imperfect ones who sometimes behave rashly and dangerously, as both Saudi Arabia and Turkey have recently. When it looked like President Trump would withdraw from Syria at the beginning of the year, 70 senators joined in warning of the risk of precipitously withdrawing from Syria or Afghanistan. The veto-proof majority vote for my amendment to S-1, the Strengthening American Security in the Middle East Act, demonstrated strong and bipartisan appreciation for our enduring security interest in that region. The Senate spoke clearly and said that we must ensure we have set the conditions for an enduring defeat of the terrorists before any withdrawal. Regrettably, many of the Democratic senators running for president, along with my friend, the Democratic leader, parted with this bipartisan consensus and voted against this amendment. So I hope those aspiring commanders-in-chief are asked to explain how they reconcile their criticisms of the administration today with their votes just a few months ago. Maybe they'll even be asked on the debate stage this very evening. I'm heartened to hear that Vice President Pence will soon lead a delegation to begin immediate talks with Turkey to end this violence. I expect that Turkish allies listen carefully to the anger from Washington, welcome our Vice President, and take steps to repair our important relationship. It would be a tragedy for both of our nations if Turkey's escalation in Syria imperils our common fight against ISIS and embolden traditional adversaries like Iran and Russia. This would be bad for U.S. interests, but it would be terrible for Turkey. And I look forward to discussing with members on both sides and with the administration how the U.S. can stand with our partners and provide strong, principled, and consistent global leadership.